Hollywood spent 2 years searching the entire world for someone to play Michael Jackson. They auditioned hundreds of actors, dancers, and performers across multiple continents. Professional casting directors screened thousands of tapes, and after all that searching, the answer was sitting right there in the family the whole time. But here's what most people don't know. Jafar Jackson almost didn't get the role. There was one moment during the casting process that changed everything. A moment that convinced the producers he wasn't just the best choice, he was the only choice. I'm about to show you exactly why no one else on Earth could have played Michael Jackson. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why this casting decision was actually unavoidable. Let's dive in. Let me paint the picture for you. In 2021, producer Graham King, the same guy who made Bohemian Rhapsody, started the search for someone to play the King of Pop. This wasn't some small indie film. This was a major studio biopic about one of the most iconic entertainers who ever lived. They knew the stakes were high. Michael Jackson had fans across every continent, every generation, every culture. Get the casting wrong, and the entire film would fail before it even started. So they went big, a worldwide casting search. Open calls in Los Angeles, New York, London, Tokyo. They looked at trained actors, professional dancers, Michael Jackson impersonators, people who'd spent their entire lives studying his every move. But here's where it gets interesting. After months of auditions, something wasn't clicking. Sure, they found people who could dance like Michael. They found people who could sing like Michael, but nobody could be Michael. The director, Antoine Fuqua, said they were looking for something beyond talent. They needed someone who could capture Michael's spirit, his aura, that indefinable quality that made him him. And that's when Jafar Jackson's name came up. Now here's the kicker. Jafar Jackson was born on July 25th, 1996. His father, Jermaine Jackson, founding member of the Jackson 5. That makes Jafar Michael Jackson's nephew. But this isn't just about having the same last name. This is about genetics. Miles Teller, who plays Michael's lawyer in the film, said something that really stuck with me. He said, "There will never be somebody who portrays somebody in a biopic that has a ton of that DNA already in him." Think about what that means. Jafar didn't have to learn how to move like a Jackson. It's literally in his DNA. The way he walks, the way he carries himself, the subtle mannerisms, these aren't things he studied from YouTube videos. These are inherited family traits. The Jackson family has a specific way of moving. If you've ever watched Michael, Janet, Jermaine, there's a fluidity, a grace that's distinctly Jackson. Jafar was born with that. But that's not all. His voice. Jafar has the Jackson family vocal tone, that smooth, soulful quality that runs through the entire bloodline. It's not an imitation, it's authentic. Producer Graham King said he was blown away by the way Jafar organically personifies the spirit and personality of Michael. That word, organically. He doesn't have to try, it just is. But wait. Having the DNA is one thing. What about actually knowing Michael as a person? This is where it gets deeply personal. Jafar has actual memories of his Uncle Michael. Real memories. Not stories he read in magazines or documentaries he watched. He was at Neverland Ranch. He played hide and seek with Michael. He went on the rides. He watched movies with him during family gatherings. Now think about what that means for playing this role. An outside actor could study Michael Jackson for years. They could watch every interview, every performance, every behind-the-scenes clip. But they'd still only know the public Michael Jackson. Jafar knew the private Michael, the uncle who laughed with family, the person behind the superstar, the man who existed when the cameras weren't rolling. He grew up hearing first-hand stories from his grandmother Catherine, from his father Jermaine, from the people who actually lived those moments. These aren't tabloid stories. These are family truths. And here's exactly how that matters. When you're portraying someone, you need to understand not just what they did, but why they did it. You need to understand the emotional weight they carried, the pressure, the loneliness, the love. Jafar understands what it means to carry the Jackson name. He lived through the media frenzy after Michael's death. He knows the burden of that legacy because he carries it too. Speaking of that burden, this brings us to the moment I mentioned at the beginning, the moment that changed everything. Graham King met Jafar over 2 years before the casting was officially announced. This was early in the process. They were still seeing other actors, still doing the worldwide search. But something happened in that first meeting. King later said, "It was clear that Jafar was the only person to take on this role. There was something so powerful in his presence." Director Antoine Fuqua noticed it too. He talked about Jafar's spiritual connection to Michael. Not just physical resemblance, not just talent, a spiritual connection. But here's what nobody tells you about that meeting. They didn't just sit and talk. They asked Jafar to perform, and when he moved, when he started dancing, the room went quiet. Because they weren't watching someone imitating Michael Jackson. They were watching someone channeling Michael Jackson. The mannerisms weren't studied. They were natural. The energy wasn't forced. It was organic. The aura, that indefinable quality they'd been searching for, was there. That was the moment. That's when they knew. They could search the entire world, audition 10,000 more people, and they'd never find what was standing right in front of them. But wait, if it was that obvious, why did the search continue for 2 more years? Here's the truth. Even though they knew Jafar was special, they had to be absolutely certain. Because casting a family member comes with risks. Critics would say it's nepotism. People would question whether he earned the role or was just handed it because of his name. The bar for Jafar was actually higher than it would be for any outside actor. So they continued the search. They kept auditioning people, not because they thought they'd find someone better, but because they needed to prove to themselves, to the studio, to the world, that Jafar was truly the best. And after 2 years, hundreds of auditions, and a global casting call, they came back to the same answer. Jafar Jackson was the only person who could do this. Now here's where it gets even better. The final stamp of approval came from the one person whose opinion mattered most. Katherine Jackson, Michael's mother, the matriarch of the entire Jackson family. She publicly supported Jafar's casting. She said that Jafar embodies her son, and that it's wonderful to see him carry on the Jackson legacy. Think about the weight of that statement. Katherine knew Michael better than anyone on earth. She raised him. She watched him become a superstar. She witnessed his struggles, his triumphs, his pain. If she says Jafar embodies Michael, that's not just a family being supportive. That's validation from the ultimate authority. This wasn't nepotism. This was the people who knew Michael best saying, "He's the one." But that's not all. There's one more piece to this puzzle that makes Jafar truly irreplaceable. Let me break down what an outside actor, no matter how talented, could never bring to this role. They could never have the genetic resemblance. Makeup only goes so far. There's something about actual DNA that you just can't fake. They could never have the inherited movement patterns. These come from growing up in the Jackson family. The way Jafar moves isn't learned, it's in his blood. They could never have the natural vocal tone. That Jackson sound? It's in the DNA. An actor can train for years, but they'd still be imitating. Jafar doesn't have to imitate. They could never have personal memories of Michael. You can't research what it felt like to be at Neverland Ranch. You can't Google the sound of Michael's laugh during a private family moment. They could never have the family's blessing. Not like this. Katherine Jackson said Jafar embodies her son. She would never feel the same watching a stranger play Michael. They could never have the spiritual connection. You either have it or you don't. Director Antoine Fuqua saw it immediately. It's not something acting school can teach. And they could never have the understanding of what it means to carry that legacy every single day. Jafar didn't research the Jackson name for a role. He's lived with it his entire life. Here's exactly how to think about it. An actor plays a role. Jafar carries his uncle's spirit. There's a fundamental difference. Jafar doesn't impersonate Michael Jackson. He channels him. And that's something no amount of training, no amount of talent could ever replicate. After searching the entire world for 2 years, the answer was there all along. In the family. In the bloodline, in the one person who was born to tell this story. So remember that moment I mentioned at the beginning? The one that changed everything? It was when Jafar walked into that room and moved like Michael, not because he'd practiced it, but because it was part of who he is. That's when they knew. The 2-year search continued, not because they were looking for someone better, but because they needed to prove to the world that the obvious answer was the right answer. And Katherine's blessing? That was the final confirmation that they'd found exactly what they were looking for. Jafar Jackson wasn't just the best choice to play Michael Jackson. He was the only choice. Because nobody else on earth carries Michael's DNA, his memories, his family's blessing, and his spirit. This role wasn't cast. It was destined. So there you have it. The real reason Jafar Jackson was the only person who could play Michael Jackson. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.